At St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, midday sun blazed outside. Dr. Eliza leaned back on the couch in the on-call room, her slender shoulders slumping as if every ounce of strength had been drained from her. The morning had been a relentless blur, one case of severe pneumonia with complications, a sudden episode of anaphylactic shock, and an IV line for a toddler whose veins were as fine as threads. Her eyelids grew heavy. She meant only to close them for 10 minutes. But sleep came fast and unnervingly deep, the kind of sleep born of exhaustion with no time to prepare, no chance to put up the walls that usually kept the shadows of memory at bay. And then the darkness rushed in. In her dream she was small again. No, she was the little Eliza from 20 years ago. Not in a hospital, not in an on-call room. Instead, she was in a cramped, damp room, the sickly yellow glow of a weak bulb spilling over a floor stained with watermarks. She heard the shuffle of slippers dragging against the ground, then the slow creak of a door latch. As the door opened, the sharp stench of alcohol hit her nose. A man's silhouette filled the frame, blocking most of the light. Panic surged through her. Her small legs tried to step back, but the wall behind her was cold and unyielding. Heavy footsteps drew closer. Then a rough, unsteady hand seized her arm and yanked hard. Eliza struggled, a tiny cry escaping her lips, the cry of a child who already knew calling out would be useless. A stinging slap. The dim light flickered. A jumble of images erupted, chaotic and sharp. The dusty space under a bed where she once hid. The pitch-black corner of a closet where she held her breath so she wouldn't be found. The bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. And the pounding of her heart, off-beat against the thud of pursuing footsteps. The nightmare gripped her like an invisible hand tightening around her throat. Eliza was drenched in sweat, her breathing ragged. In the dream, she lunged forward, running endlessly, but her legs were heavy as lead, unable to escape that room. Then that hand seized her again, yanking her by the collar. She jolted awake. Her lungs felt like they had just broken the surface after being held underwater. Sweat soaked through her clothes, her white coat clinging to her back. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, drowning out the hum of the ceiling fan. It took her several seconds to realize where she was: the on-call room, the children's hospital, midday in the middle of her shift. Eliza pressed her hands to her face. Her fingers were ice cold, but her skin burned hot. In that moment, with the panic still clinging to her, she realized she had never allowed those memories to cross the hospital's threshold. They had always stayed behind, locked in sleepless nights, when she curled up in her small apartment on the outskirts of town, the streetlight spilling through the window cracks and painting shifting shadows across the ceiling. But today was different. They had followed her here. The thought sent a chill down her spine. This was a hospital. She had to be steady, sharp, the person patients and families could rely on. There was no room for nightmares here. The sharp ring of the desk phone made her flinch. She quickly stood, though her steps wavered slightly. Forcing her voice into calm, she picked up the receiver and heard the news. A pediatric patient needed an urgent consult in the ICU. Hanging up the phone, Eliza stood still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. She straightened the collar of her white coat, adjusted the stethoscope around her neck, and quickly wiped the sweat from her forehead. Each movement felt like another layer of armor she put on to hide the chaos that had just consumed her. Eliza was one of the most beloved doctors in the pediatric ward, always dedicated, gentle, working as if she never knew fatigue. Colleagues and parents alike called her by the affectionate nickname, the children's hero. No one knew that behind the warm smile and the unpaid overtime hours was a heart carrying scars so deep they would never fully heal. She was especially sensitive to young patients who showed signs of abuse, the frightened eyes, the lowered gaze, the slight tremor in their hands when someone came too close. With cases like these, Eliza was always the first to volunteer, willing to stay long after her shift ended to talk to them, hold them tightly, or do whatever she could to help them feel safe again. In the discreet notebook hidden in her desk drawer, there was one line she had written just for herself: "If I couldn't protect myself back then, at least I can protect these children now." That afternoon, the atmosphere in the pediatric ER at St. Jude was as taut as a drawn wire. On the electronic board, a new case appeared, marked in red, high priority, domestic abuse victim, suspected assault. Eliza was reviewing another patient's chart when the head nurse called. "Dr. Monroe, 12-year-old girl, multiple injuries, police escort. She hasn't said a single word." The way the nurse paused on that last sentence sent a sharp pang through Eliza's chest. She headed quickly to Trauma Room 4. There, a young girl sat on the bed, her back against the wall, knees pulled tightly to her chest. Her hair was tangled, her face scratched. A makeshift bandage wrapped her left arm, but blood still seeped through. Her shirt was old and crumpled, and her bare feet were bluish from the cold. Outside the door, 2 officers quietly spoke with a social worker. "Guardian says she fell down the stairs, but there are no stairs in the house," one murmured. Eliza took a deep breath and stepped in. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Eliza. I'll be your doctor today." The girl didn't look up, her shoulders trembling slightly. In her downcast figure, Eliza saw a reflection of herself years ago, curled up the same way, avoiding every gaze, wishing for just one thing: to disappear. "What's your name?" Eliza asked gently. There was no reply, only the steady beeping of the monitor, blending with the ticking of the wall clock. Eliza knelt so their eyes were level, keeping a safe distance. "I just want to help you feel less pain. We're going to change your bandage, okay?" She opened a pack of gauze and pulled a chair closer. But the moment her fingers lightly touched the girl's wrist to remove the old dressing, "Don't touch me!" The scream was sharp and piercing, shattering the silence and ripping through the walls Eliza had built inside herself. The girl shot up and shoved hard. Caught off guard, Eliza stumbled backward into the instrument table. Metal trays clattered to the floor, the acrid scent of antiseptic flooding the air. The girl backed into the corner, hands raised as if to block a blow. Don't. Her voice shook, breaking between sobs. "I know what people like you will do to me." A nurse stepped forward to comfort her, but the girl thrashed violently, kicking the bed frame and knocking over the blood pressure monitor. Her eyes darted wildly, her breathing rapid. 2 police officers moved in, but Eliza raised a hand to stop them. The truth was, she could barely stand herself. That scream had lodged itself in Eliza's mind like a blade, yanking her out of the ER and into the pitch-black room from her past. The cold neon lights of St. Jude dissolved into the thick darkness of that old space. The sharp scent of disinfectant gave way to the damp, musty smell of rotting wood from the closet door where she'd once been locked inside. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. When a traumatic memory is so powerful, the brain freezes it in a vivid, unchanging state. When a similar trigger appears, a sound, a smell, a scene, the memory floods back whole, making the body react as if the event is happening again. Eliza was in that exact moment now. Her throat tightened, the air seeming to drain from her lungs. Her heart pounded, cold sweat breaking across her forehead. She couldn't hear anyone, only the sound of a lock clicking shut, footsteps drawing closer, and a rough hand seizing her small arm. "Dr. Monroe?" The voice pulled her back. It was a nurse, her hand resting on Eliza's shoulder. "You're shaking. Do you need to sit down?" Eliza stepped back and dropped into a chair, her hands clutching a roll of gauze so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The girl was still sobbing, repeating "Don't touch me" over and over like a mantra. Eliza looked at her, wanting to go to her, to hold her, to say no one would hurt her again, but her own body felt frozen. A colleague touched her shoulder gently. "Eliza, let me take it from here." Eliza nodded, stood, and walked out, her legs heavy as if chained. The door closed behind her. She leaned against the wall, eyes shut, breathing hard as though she had just escaped something dangerous. In her ears, the girl's scream, Anna's scream, still echoed. It wasn't just the cry of a 12-year-old, it was her own voice from years ago. 3 days had passed since that afternoon when Anna's scream had torn through her mind. She hadn't gone back to the hospital. At first, she told the head nurse she only needed a day off to steady herself. But the next morning, standing before the mirror with a makeup brush in hand to cover the dark circles under her eyes, she noticed her hand was trembling uncontrollably. Every night was the same, jerking awake at 3 a.m., heart racing, her nightshirt soaked in sweat. The dream kept replaying like a broken tape, the thick darkness, the click of the lock, the musty smell, footsteps drawing closer, and the hot breath against her ear. When she opened her eyes, the ceiling was still there, but her body was rigid, as if it had just happened. It was a helplessness Eliza couldn't explain with medical knowledge, but she knew its name, PTSD. The head nurse called that afternoon, her voice gentle but firm, saying the hospital would arrange for someone else to cover her shifts, that she needed real rest. Eliza thought about protesting, but then realized she couldn't even steady her hands enough to brush her hair. A friend from the psych department suggested she meet with Dr. Samuel, a physician who had once left emergency medicine after a similar incident. The anesthesiology lounge was on a lower floor, far quieter than the rest of the hospital. When Eliza stepped in, the light scent of freshly roasted coffee hung in the air. Samuel was seated at a corner table, silver streaks in his hair, his head bent over a chart. When she called his name from the doorway, he looked up, his deep, steady eyes meeting hers, and nodded for her to sit. He asked if she was okay. At first, Eliza wanted to say, "I'm fine," out of reflex, but something in his gaze, just the right balance of concern and silence, stopped the words in her throat. He simply said, "I heard you had a tough case." She gave a faint smile, but it twisted at the edges. It wasn't so much a tough case as it was me being the tough part. And then Eliza began to talk. Every detail, every fragment of that afternoon, from the moment Anna screamed, to the shove that sent her crashing into the instrument table, to the instant her mind emptied and she was no longer in that ER, but 8 years old again. As she spoke, her voice was steady, clinical almost, as if she were delivering a medical report, but her hands twisted the hem of her white coat. Samuel didn't interrupt, just listened, setting his coffee cup down only when she finished. Leaning back in his chair, his gaze still fixed on her, he began slowly. "I understand that feeling more than you think. 10 years ago, I was a pediatric ER doctor. One night, they brought in an 8-year-old boy who'd been in a traffic accident. Severe trauma, massive blood loss. We did everything, transfusions, airway, chest compressions, but we couldn't save him. The moment the monitor flatlined, I heard a cry. Not from the boy's mother, but from my own mother, years earlier, when my little brother died of a high fever in her arms. He was only 6. We lived in a rural town. The ambulance didn't make it in time. I stood there in the ER, doing compressions on my patient, but in my head, I saw my brother's pale face, and I froze. Not because I feared failure, but because the past swallowed the present whole." He paused, gently turning the coffee cup in his hands, as if searching for the exact words. "PTSD doesn't spare anyone, Eliza. It's not a sign of weakness. It's your brain's way of trying to protect you from a pain that's nearly consumed you. But in this profession, the things that trigger the past will show up over and over, and each time, you lose another piece of yourself." Eliza looked up at him, silent, feeling his words cut through the layers of armor she'd been holding together. "So what did you do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel replied, "I left the ER. I moved into pediatric anesthesiology. I'm still there when the surgeries that save a child's life begin, but I'm no longer in situations that can tear me apart from the inside, not because I gave up, but because I wanted to live long enough to keep giving. Walking away isn't always failure. It can be the wise choice that saves you." Those words made Eliza lower her gaze, her eyes stinging. For years, she had believed that only by standing on the front lines, taking on the hardest cases and the most painful stories, could she live a life of meaning. But now she realized she had turned her own heart into a vessel for other people's pain until it was tearing apart. Samuel looked at her, his voice low but firm. "You've spent your whole life protecting others." "But who's protecting you? If the answer is no one, then maybe it's time you do it yourself." The question caught in her throat. For a moment, she saw the 8-year-old child within her, the little girl who had once waited for someone to open the closet door, but no one came. Maybe now, the one to open it had to be her. They stayed there for another hour. Samuel shared a few stories about children waking up from anesthesia, asking if he had magic powers. Eliza laughed for real. For the first time in days, it wasn't forced. As she stood to leave, Samuel said, "If you want to find a place where your heart doesn't get torn apart every day, I'll help you." Walking out, Eliza moved down the hallway, glancing through the glass, where the late daylight painted the children's drawings on the walls in warm gold. For the first time, that light didn't feel so far away. A month after her conversation with Samuel, Eliza Monroe returned to St. Jude, but no longer wearing the white coat of the pediatric ward. Her name now appeared on the roster for pediatric anesthesiologists. The decision had surprised some colleagues, even stirred a sense of regret in a few. But for Eliza, it wasn't a step back. It was a new path, one where she could still be there for children without facing, day after day, the situations that struck directly at her unhealed wounds. On her first morning in the new department, Eliza stepped into the operating room. The glass pane separating her from the surgical table reflected the cool, bright light overhead. She wore the green scrubs, gloves in place, the feeling unfamiliar yet not unwelcome. As the surgeon began, Eliza took her position, managing the anesthesia, monitoring every vital sign of the small patient lying still on the table. Each heartbeat flashing on the monitor reminded her that she was still helping to keep this life safe, but unlike before, when every beep of the machines was a warning that wound her nerves tight as wire, now she felt a steady calm spreading through her entire body. Outside of work, Eliza began another journey, one of healing herself. She joined a therapy group for healthcare workers who had been victims of abuse or childhood trauma. In the therapy room, they sat in a circle, each holding a small pillow, sharing their stories. At first, Eliza only listened. But one rainy afternoon, when a nurse spoke about how she couldn't touch her own son without feeling panic, Eliza found herself speaking. "I understand, because I used to avoid touching children too, not because I didn't love them, but because every time I did, I saw myself at 8 years old, trapped in a dark room." Her admission brought the room to silence. Someone placed a hand on her shoulder. In that moment, Eliza realized, speaking out didn't make her weaker, it made her lighter. Over time, the wound inside her didn't disappear completely, but it began to heal over. She learned to notice the signs that she was bleeding, the quickened heartbeat, the shortness of breath, the cold hands, and to step back before she became depleted. She understood that to walk alongside others, she had to be strong enough to stand on her own. One autumn afternoon, while preparing anesthesia for an orthopedic surgery, Eliza noticed the patient's name, Anna, the 12-year-old girl from that day. Her heart tightened, but not with the crushing panic it once brought. She stepped into the anesthesia room. Anna was older now, her hair longer, her eyes still a little wary but no longer filled with fear. "Hi, Anna. We're going to help you take a short nap so the doctors can do their work. When you wake up, you'll be fine," Eliza said, her voice calm. Anna looked at her for a few seconds, then gave a small nod. Through the glass of the operating room, Eliza watched as the surgery went smoothly. When Anna was wheeled into recovery, Eliza stood at the doorway and saw Anna open her eyes and give a faint smile. That smile, small as it was enough to let a trace of warmth seep into the place that had once been only cold. She stood there, not stepping forward, not needing to touch, just smiling back. In her heart, Eliza knew they were no longer two people trapped in dark memories. They were in the present now, where the light was enough to see each other clearly. On her way home, the Memphis afternoon was bathed in a golden, gentle sun. Eliza thought of what Samuel had once asked her. "You've spent your whole life protecting others, but who's protecting you?" Now she had the answer. It was herself. She had come to understand a simple but important truth. You cannot heal someone else when you are still bleeding. Knowing yourself before trying to help others is vital, and you must care for yourself so you can care for others. No matter how noble the intention, forgetting yourself in the process of helping others can leave you depleted and deeply hurt. There are many ways to walk alongside someone, as long as you don't lose yourself in the journey. That day, when Eliza opened the door to her apartment, it no longer felt like she was stepping into an empty space. The sunset streamed through the window, casting warmth across the room. She hung up her white coat, made herself a cup of tea, and for the first time in a long while, sat down on the sofa without feeling her heart race. Outside, the city was still noisy, the hospital still had its emergencies, and countless pains still had no easy answers. But Eliza knew she would continue to be here, still a part of the healing journey for children, only now she would walk it with a heart that had stitched up its own tears. And in that way she was still the children's hero, but she had also learned how to be the hero of her own life.